Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight with us at the Benelux Pavilion. I want to give a special shout out to all the Dutch people that are here tonight because it's actually a Dutch holiday today. It is Pakjesavond, which is basically our version of Santa Claus. If I were at home right now, I would probably be singing songs and unpacking gifts with my little 6-year-old sister. She's a little bit mad with me because I'm missing out tonight, but I am here representing her voice and other future generations' voices at COP28, so I hope she forgives me for missing out. So today we are talking about realizing climate justice through institutions. We have 3 panels with a diverse number of panelists. We have all ages from all around the world. We have civil society, we have policymakers. So we are talking also about a lot of different subjects. We're talking about systemic changes through both fossil fuel subsidy reform. We're talking about education. We're talking about law, environmental law. So I think this might be one of the broadest events at the entirety of COP. But there is one common thread. We as Dutch youth, we joined hands and organized this event together. And we, in the Netherlands, we talk a lot about youth inclusion, how to do it and how to do it well and how to ensure that youth voices are heard in policy. But we wanted to show you that this is what you get when you include youth voices. We wanted to stop talking about youth inclusion and just do it. So that's what we're here for tonight, and I hope you guys enjoy, and I'll give the word to Mert.
Thank you, Diewertje. We'll start with our first panel. I would like to ask my first 2 panelists to come forward. Our third one is on her way, so I would like to ask Christel Prat and Prajul Rana to take a seat. You can sit. Yes, you can sit. That's fine. Due to mic shortages, we'll just use the lectern as well. I have the honor to be here today with these 2 amazing speakers. I will just first give them a brief introduction. On my left side, I have Christel Prat. Christel Prat is the Assistant Secretary General for the Environment and Climate Action at the Organization of African, Caribbean and Pacific States, also known as OACPS. And she's also the former Deputy Secretary General of the Pacific Islands Forum. Please give a round of applause for Christel Prat. Right next to Ms. Prat, we have Prajul. Prajul Rana, I must say. He's a practicing lawyer based in Nepal, and he's currently pursuing a master's in political science at the Tribhuvan University. He also contributes to the Asian front of the World's Youth for Climate Justice campaign, and he's currently engaged as a researcher consultant for the Center of Environmental Law and Policy at the University of Colombo in Sri Lanka. Applause for Prajul. And yes, the question of this side event today is, what is climate justice and how can we achieve climate justice through the institutions? And before we go deeper into that and before you are allowed to ask questions on this topic, I would like to first give the word to Ms. Pratt to briefly introduce who she is and what she in her daily job is doing to achieve such climate justice. So Ms. Pratt, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mert, and thank you very much for your very kind invitation to participate in this event. And a very Merry Christmas to all of you that are not celebrating it with your families today. I work for the OACPS, as Mert has mentioned, and why am I here? Maybe just to give you a bit of information about the organisation. It's an international organisation made up of 79 member countries, 47 from sub-Saharan Africa, 16 from the Caribbean, and 15 from the Pacific region. So all of our members are vulnerable countries, and particularly vulnerable to the impacts of the climate crisis. we became, and our members became involved in the campaign, which was led by one of our member states, Vanuatu, and that is to request the International Court of Justice for an advisory opinion on states' obligations with respect to climate change. Our member states have taken 3 decisions, so we have 3 ministerial mandates, 2 of them really getting behind supporting the UN General Assembly resolution, and then most recently in July, a tasking to in fact become involved in the actual written statements and the proceedings of the ICJ, because as we know, a very historical decision was taken in March of this year in the UN General Assembly. So our taskings are that the OACPS is going to make a submission to the court and participate in the proceedings as an international organisation. But we were also tasked to actually support our regions, and by that to support legal right shops for our member states, given that some of our countries have limited capacity to engage, and perhaps I might talk a bit about that in a little while,
yes,
because I'm getting away with myself, I think. But essentially, an international organisation interested in engaging in initiatives, multilateral initiatives of global importance. And so sorry for going on, I got carried away, Murat.
It's perfect. Actually, our third panelist, Aisha, just came in, so welcome Aisha as well. And this is the perfect moment, I can introduce Aisha too. Aisha Siddiqa is a Pakistani-American climate justice advocate. She's the co-founder of Fossil Free University and Polluters Out. Obviously also a friend of the Pacific Island students fighting climate change and World Youth for Climate Justice. And she's a member of the Secretary General's Youth Advisory Panel on Climate Change. Please welcome Aisha. Applause for Aisha. And now I'd like to give the word to Prajwal to briefly introduce who you are, what you're doing for WICJ, and also could you maybe explain to our honorable guests what an advisory opinion is?
Hello everyone, good evening. Hello?
Yes.
Yeah. So, good evening everyone. I'm Prajwal Bikram Rana. I am based in Nepal. I am a lawyer by profession, but I'm engaged in climate activism right now. So I'm also doing my master's in political science in Nepal itself. So the World's Youth for Climate Justice, in World's Youth for Climate Justice, I'm working in the Asian front. So we have different regional fronts of World's Youth for Climate Justice, and I'm working in the Asian front of the campaign, and I'm here in COP representing the Asian front. So right now, along with this, I'm also engaged with the University of Colombo as a research consultant in the Crimes Against Future Generation, a research project in Crimes Against Future Generations. So World's Youth for Climate Justice, along with Pacific Island students fighting climate change, initiated this campaign of ICJ advisory opinion. So it was, at first it was the Pacific Island students who took the lead, who took the initiative from the university classroom to take this idea forward. So they were the one who approached their government, the Vanuatu government, and approached about how can we, as a law student, take climate change to the International Court of Justice. And from there, the Pacific countries, with the lead of Vanuatu government, went to the General Assembly, and as she said, in March, the resolution was passed unanimously. And World's Youth for Climate Justice, at present, we are working to convince the governments. We are working together with governments, not against the government, but we are working with government to submit the written submissions. So the deadline is January 2024, 22nd January 2024. So ICJ has set the deadline. So we are working to convince the government to submit written statements to the ICJ. And with this, especially, we are focusing on countries from global south, and those countries who are more vulnerable to climate change, so that we can bring their stories to the court. And we are also doing a witness statement, which is kind of storytelling from the ground, from the communities, from the indigenous people, from the people who have been affected by the climate change. We are bringing those stories through witness statement, by annexing it to the written statement to the court. So this is what we are doing right now. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Prajwal. Yes, you can applause for that if you want, of course. I would like now to pass on the mic to Aisha. If you briefly could introduce yourself and what your current job is, work is for the Youth Secretary General's Climate Advisory Board.
Sure. First, I want to apologize for running in late. I actually was in a meeting for the work that I am doing, and I'll describe. And then I want to apologize for leaving early. We have a event immediately after this. So my name's Aisha Siddiqa. I am serving as a climate advisor to the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, and we advise him on everything from climate finance to energy to the role of young people in climate justice and rights of future generations, which then pivots into more concrete what I'm working on. This campaign that my colleagues and I have been working on is a direct result of the work that the young people asking for the ICJO is, and we were incredibly inspired by youth wanting to have their witness testimonies in front of the International Court of Justice. So we've launched a Future Generations Tribunal. And the thought process behind this is, well, human rights are going to be established by the ICJO, and ICJO is going to clarify what states' obligations are. But democratically speaking, children, and specifically future generations as a body, cannot take anybody to court. They cannot be adequately represented. And on top of that, the right of future generation has not been articulated, neither by a court or a government. So to answer those questions, we discovered that, well, not discovered, I think it's a little bit of common sense. The generation closest in proximity to future generations is children and young people. So who better to articulate the rights of future generations than children born today? And they are, because they are closest in proximity, and also because they have a moral say in what happens to the world, we are hosting assemblies in 7 different locations around the world to collect their witness testimonies and accounts. And after we collect said witness testimonies and accounts through these hearings, we will begin drafting the first ever Universal Declaration on the Rights of Future Generations, written by the youth for the youth to come. And to summate that, the reason why we are approaching this and you might be asking yourself, why not go through the multilateral system? Why not propose to the UN to begin articulating the declaration? And the answer to that is, although this idea is coming from the inspiration of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that declaration was written by select states, and it leaves out a lot of other people. And a country like the United States hasn't even signed it. Law is implemented, and there is a direct consequence of law when there's movement, when people believe it is their unalienable right. Otherwise, it's just words on paper. So we intend on building a movement. that then will hopefully spark the eventual articulation of this in formal legal systems. But every child has a right to a future, no matter where they're born. And that's what we hope to do with this project.
Thank you so much, Aisha. Yeah, we can applaud for that, of course. There's no need to look at me for the applause, guys. You can always applaud. I just wanted to also explain to our listeners here why exactly an event on the ICJO and institutions in the Benelux Pavilion. Well, the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, is based in the city of The Hague in the Netherlands, and therefore will be the place to be for the upcoming years when this case will be brought in front of the judges of the court. So that's why the Netherlands in this particular instance plays a very special role within this multilateral system that we have here at the UN. And it's also one of the more interesting facts that EU states all voted in favor of the advisory opinion resolution last March, which automatically means that these states want to see a resolution, see an advisory opinion in front of the court. And our goal, our collective goal as WICJ, the PISSCC, and youth constituencies worldwide is to make it a progressive advisory opinion. Because if you have an advisory opinion, you better as well make it progressive and influential. And that's a great question. I just want to head first for Christelle. Because Christelle, you're working with the OACPS. What is exactly the climate justice element that the states that you represent are seeking in front of the court? What does the court offer them with this advisory opinion?
Where can I start after hearing such eloquent interventions from those much younger than I am, and perhaps better qualified, to speak here in this event. But as I mentioned, our member states, 79 member states, are developing countries, all vulnerable to the impacts of climate change and the climate crisis and emergency that we're experiencing right now. And for some of our member countries, it is truly an existential threat, particularly our small island developing states that are very much at the front line of what the world is experiencing, but they are experiencing it on a daily basis. I feel that was really very much the impetus behind the ministerial mandates that we are having to implement at this time. And, really also the fact that we do value, as a members-owned organisation, our children, our youth, our women, and our peoples. 1.3 billion of the world's population happen to live within the member countries of the OACPS. In terms of our engagement, if I may say that while there is a huge commitment by our members to engage in the process itself, what we are observing is that as much as they are vulnerable to not just the climate crisis, but others of biodiversity loss, pollution, and many other challenges that we're facing globally, many of our countries have limited capacity to engage. So our observation is that while many, if not all, of our member states would like to engage, and what is it Pradswell said earlier, there is a timeline. That timeline is the 22nd of January 2024. So 2024 seems a long way away, but it's 6 short weeks away. And one of the initiatives that we're taking at the moment is to write to the ICJ registrar to request an extension of at least 4 months to allow those developing countries who are the most vulnerable, need to be heard, their testimonies need to be heard, to be able to actually engage in a robust way, so that advisory opinion is a strong one. And so for those that are in situations here in this room that can contribute to that request by also joining and writing to the ICJ registrar for that extra time, we believe that that extra time of 4 months will make an enormous difference to the advisory opinion that we are all looking forward to receiving. Thank you, Murat.
Christelle, I know that Aisha needs to go, so we're going to ask you a final question before you leave, Aisha. Because Aisha, the role of young people in these international negotiations and in the international climate discourse is very important. What would be your wish for the upcoming ICJO? And if you had a message to the Dutch pavilion, the Benelux pavilion, I must say, what would that be? And how could Western states especially engage with this advisory opinion?
My message to the Western states and the ICJ is the following. The ability and the responsibility that the International Court of Justice has to link climate change to human rights is going to allow us to build a world that is sustainable, a world that we will be proud of living in. And for that reason, when you are bringing forth your annexes, when you are bringing forth the stories, when you are asking the court to articulate think of the young people and the future generations and put them at the center of this. There is a beautiful, beautiful phrase that has inspired at least the tribunals, and it's a short story that goes, a couple of 100 years ago, the chiefs of the nations in the Americas gathered together, and they asked themselves, how do we govern our people? And in order to govern our people, they looked to the land. And then they asked themselves, what does the land and the environment around us prioritize? They looked to the animals, and they looked to the plants, and they discovered that the environment, nature, prioritizes its young. So they then promised, and they made a commitment that no law, no business, no corporation of any kind would leave the children behind, would leave the young generations behind. And so that is my request to the ICJ and the Western governments that are going to be putting forth their submissions. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, I have to go.
Thank you so much, Aisha. And we'll definitely hear and see more of her. Thank you so much for being here today. Prajwal, this question actually also directly is, directly for you as well. Could you maybe also explain from the point of view of a WICJ campaigner what it exactly is that we are currently demanding? I'm saying we because that is also the double hat that I'm currently wearing. Could you please maybe elaborate our viewers and also explain what the Youth Climate Justice Handbook is and what kind of role it plays?
Yeah. Thank you. So I think before Mert has also asked me to say what is AO, so I'll just give brief description about it. Maybe many of you know it, but still. So advisory opinion is, there is two process. There is contentious case and advisory opinion in the ICJ. So the advisory opinion is not a binding instrument per se, but it is the tool which can help in development of international law. It will actually help in development of international law. It is the opinion of the court, and right now the court has asked states to give written statement and to hear the voices of the states, and then there will be oral statements, and then there will be the advisory opinion will come. So that's it, I think, from advisory opinion. With regards to the question, second question, I think for Western states and for ICJ, what I would like to say is, for Global South, many countries have never participated in ICJ proceedings. It includes my country as well. We have never been to ICJ or any other tribunals, international tribunals. So it is very new for us. And that's why we need support from the states who have exercised, been there, who have experience and who know about it. Even the smallest procedure, like when I go to my country's ministry, they are confused. What is the process? Which ministry should look after it? Whether it should be Ministry of Environment, whether it should be Ministry of Law, or whether it should be Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So they are confused. The jurisdiction is of which ministry. So that's why there are so small things which the states who have never been to ICJ are confused about. So that's why I would request, especially the Western states and those states who have experience of ICJ proceedings, to help those states who are not there, and maybe find pro bono lawyers who could assist those states. For ICJ, it needs to hear the voice of the Global South. I know there are cases where ICJ judges are influenced, or there are politics and everything which we hear, but the ICJ needs to hear the voices of the most vulnerable communities and the people who are suffering from the real climate change. And that's why the World's Youth for Climate Justice has been focusing on the Global South right now, because we have many fronts right now. That's why we have Asian fronts, we have Latin American front, we have African front. So we are focusing on those states, and especially from those regions, we are focusing on those states which are mostly vulnerable to climate change. And WICJ has prepared this handbook. It's called Youth Climate Justice Handbook. We have 3 parts. So this is summary for policymakers, legal memorandum, 2 parts. So here there is a voices of youths. Yeah. So thank you. So here we have included the voices of the youths, and we have also mentioned about the principles of environment law, which could be used by the states in their written statements as well as in the oral statements. It is a research work, and we are hoping that the states will be utilizing this document. And whenever we go to meet any government officials, we try our best to hand over this book to them so that they can utilize it in their written statement or in oral proceeding.
Yes.
Yeah.
And actually, that's a very good point that you made about the pro bono help and assistance of countries. Maybe, Christelle, the assistance of countries, why is that so important? And how do countries know how to act with the ICJ? Have they ever done that before? And how do you see that yourself?
No, thank you very much for that. And I think that when I was getting carried away with myself earlier on, it was really just to outline the support that we are trying to provide to our member countries. So as I mentioned, we have 3 regions. The Pacific has already had legal rights shops just to support member states in preparing written statements, but as already articulated, to really explain the procedures, because many of our member states are not familiar with them. We're working as well with the Caribbean Commission, CARICOM, and the African Union Commission to also hold legal rights shops for Caribbean and African countries. And this is where the actual timing and coordination becomes so crucial. We've not had the legal rights shops yet. We've had one in the Caribbean, a very short introduction, and we're yet to hold one in the African region. And so 6 weeks away from actually submitting written statements, some of our member states have not started. Now, I mean, I think that, as has been said, the most vulnerable countries and communities in the world, those countries of the global south, need to engage and need to be involved in this important process. And so I can't stress enough that developed countries and particularly EU member countries can actually reach out and support the global south, either with legal capacity, and supporting some of our countries to be able to make those submissions to the court. And this is one initiative, I think, that will make an enormous difference, not just to ourselves now, not just to our youth leaders, and I really commend the World Youth for Climate Justice. Your efforts and your commitment have been impeccable, and I know that you will continue to grow from strength to strength. So it is really about our lives now, but in particular those of future generations, and I think that they are those that are not able to speak now, and so we've got to do something for them. And I think Aisha's, the initiative that Aisha outlined is another important strand, but this particular advisory opinion of the ICJ is absolutely crucial. So that extension, I keep going on about it, but I think that, to me, that's really one of the first things, because if we can do that and we can get the ICJ to registrar to realise that, then we've got a little bit more time and we can be very coordinated in our efforts to supporting all countries, but in particular those developing countries whose voices need to be heard as well. Thank you.
And to follow up on that, it means that every member state of the UN can ask the court to extend the deadline for submission. Well, let it be heard on the record that those representatives of states that have the opportunity to do so, please do so, looking at some people in the public. And now I also would like to see if there's any questions in the public, because we're almost rounding up our first part of this event. So are there currently any questions for Prajul and or Christelle from the audience? Looking around. I see one hand, yes. If you could please stand up.
Well, today we're talking about realizing climate justice through institutions. Why do you think the International Court is like the right institution to realize class justice?
Christelle or Prajul? Yeah?
Okay.
You can both answer.
Yeah. So thank you for the question. I think International Court of Justice is the right institution for this, because first of all, it is the highest court. We say it highest court because it is the judicial body of the United Nations, where there are like largest member states of the world. So there are many member states. That's why I think that is one reason why ICJ is important here. Another is because it has the history of making and developing international law. So ICJ is the body, and it is, of course, the body is, the judges are the experts of international law. So their opinion is very important for the development of international law. Even the concurring opinion, even the dissenting opinion is very important in the development of international law. That's why the ICJ is another, that is another reason. So yeah, I think you can add more on it.
I don't think I can add more, apart from it really places people at the centre of the climate crisis. And I think that, we've in many respects, it started out as an environmental issue, but we are focusing on people, and I think the ICJ, I think as you've mentioned, is the highest court to be able to offer an opinion on this. And so the very reason why we should be concentrated to make sure that that advisory opinion is a strong one. It places people at the centre of this crisis which is so often forgotten. Thank you.
Yes, and a final look at the audience. If there's a final question, please ask it now. And I don't see any hands. I would like to finalize this part of our side event by thanking our speakers and our guests, and by also providing you all with a final statement. So it's good to know that in the upcoming months and probably years, I would say, this case is going to be very influential. You will hear about it in the news, you'll see it on the streets, and you will definitely be tackled by one of our campaigners out there, in a friendly, consensual way, obviously. And the request is to help us amplify this quest for climate justice. Help us, support us by any means necessary. Whether you're a journalist, you're a lawyer, or you're a doctor, or anything actually, it doesn't matter. It's a global movement, and I think it was also very important for us to show that our panelists are also from everywhere around the world, and we are not centered on one continent. We're on all continents except Antarctica, not yet at least. So let us build this movement, and I would like to thank you all for being here, and thank you all for joining us today. Thank you.
So thank you, Mert. That was a very interesting panel. And let's quickly, also due to the time, because we're on a very tight schedule here, let's move on to the second panel. And I won't welcome you once more, but it's good to see that so many people are interested to follow the second panel discussion as well. Because it's on a very important topic. And the topic is fossil fuel subsidies. And this is actually a hot topic in the Netherlands. People are taking to the streets, because governments are funding the fossil fuel industry with billions of dollars. And this has to change in light of the climate crisis. Let me first briefly state what we're talking about here, because the World Trade Organization speaks of a subsidy if obviously there is a direct flow of funds toward private companies. But they also speak of a subsidy if there are missed government revenues. In practice, this means tax refunds and tax exemptions. And the numbers on these are huge. If you look on a global scale, the fossil fuel subsidies were estimated to be between 1 trillion, numbered by the IEA, the International Energy Organization, to 7 trillion, stated by the International Monetary Fund. Please let that sink in. This is huge. This corresponds to 7.1% of global GDP. So there's a huge, huge urgency to phase out fossil fuel subsidies in light of the climate crisis. And it also provides a great chance. It could be the key to raising the funds that we need to effectively tackle the climate crisis, to fund loss and damage, to fund climate finance, and to make work of adaptation. So that's why I'm so glad that we're here today to talk about this very important topic with our distinguished panel. And first, since I'm from a youth organization, I would want to start with the youth by introducing my first panelist. And he's the Mexican youth representative. But he also works for OEM, an organization that works on achieving a just and sustainable energy transition. Please give a round of applause for Carlos Villaseñor. And then secondly, he used to play a pivotal role in achieving the European Green Deal together with Frans Timmermans. And he's currently the Special Envoy for Climate and Environment at the European External Action Service. Please, a round of applause for Tony Agota. And then third, she is the policy lead for climate justice at Oxfam Novib. Please, some applause for Hilde Stroot. It is so great seeing you here today to discuss this important topic. We only have one microphone. I would kindly ask you to pass it on through the discussion. And first let me start by, maybe you can quickly, I already introduced you, state your involvement with this issue, and also your first thoughts on fossil fuel subsidies and how to get rid of them, basically. So if I can start with you, Tony.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction, and great to see you here. So my previous role was in the cabinet of Frans Timmermans, where we designed the European Green Deal, which I think is arguably one of the biggest paradigm shifts. And what is interesting, and what my boss always said, there was no way we could do this without the Fridays for Future marches. In other words, there was no way we could do it without the organization of the next generations. And that's not just a cliche, it is absolutely true. But what we also noticed is that when we designed this, it is in an environment, a democratic environment, where we were pushing the boundaries to come to a program with 13 legislations to reduce emissions in 2030 at least 55%. And we're going to overachieve. We will get 57%, most probably. But we are also running into interference. And then the crisis held. And so when I was being briefed before I came here, and I looked at the numbers that I got from my briefers on fossil fuel subsidies, I decided not to give you these numbers, because I don't trust the numbers that I got, and I frankly think that they're a lot higher, and you already quoted the IEA. I do think there's good to mention one thing, that these numbers raised enormously during the crisis. And in the EU, there was literally a panic, because it showed our dependency upon Russia, the war, but it also showed our addiction and how strongly we are still stuck. Our whole economy, which is a 150-year-old fossil-fueled economy, is stuck in that. That's the bad news. The good news is that when it comes to renewables, we're really gaining. From 2021 to 2022, we had an increase from 26 gigawatt to 41 gigawatt, a 45% increase from wind. So 39% of all our energy is renewable, and with our Repower EU, we're going to accelerate that. And that's happening. It's happening now, and business are internalizing it. So it's happening. But these fossil fuel subsidies, and I hope this COP will take a decision, where the negotiations have just started. I know a big question will be, what are we going to do with fossil fuels? What are we going to do with these subsidies? If it's up to us, we would like to get rid of it and get rid of these subsidies as quickly as we possibly can. And if we have subsidies to support people who are in energy poverty, then at least the most vulnerable, and not like all over society. Because frankly speaking, I speak for myself, I don't need a subsidy to pay for higher energy prices. I can afford it. There are people that cannot. So those are my first thoughts.
Thank you so much for that opening statement, Tony. And as you can see, our fourth panelist also arrived. Please welcome the Director General for Climate and Energy Policy, Michel Heidra. And also for Michel, we're starting with an opening round of like an initial statement on your first feelings, but also your involvement on the topic of fossil fuel subsidies.
Thank you, Dion, and sorry for being late here. It's fantastic to have this discussion here, and I'm very proud that the Netherlands is formulating this joint statement on ending fossil fuel subsidies, so that we were able to take the lead in this, and our Minister Rob Jetten will, in the coming weekend, indeed try to find as many other signatories of that statement to form as strong coalition as possible. And when I look back at the file, I think I've been naive. Many people have been naive. In 2019, when the then current Minister of Economic Affairs and Climate, Erik Wiebes, was looking at the question, do we have fossil subsidies? He said, no, of course not. We're not subsidizing gasoline, or we're not subsidizing as some other countries do. So what do you want? The answer is zero. Actually, that's also how I thought it at the Treasury. There's no clear subsidy. But then people started to ask, no. There are indirect advantages in the fossil fuels. There are the tax advantages to certain types of fossil fuels, and we have to look more carefully into them. And of course, some scientists started looking at it, and they came to figures of 5, 10 billion, and became a continuous subject of discussion where people said, yeah, is a lower price for gas for large corporate, is that a fossil subsidy? Look, our neighbors in Belgium have a far lower tax, or if citizens pay a higher tax for electricity or gas, and corporates don't, is that a fossil fuel subsidy? Come on, we have higher taxes than anywhere else, so why should this be labeled a fossil fuel subsidy? And yet the dialogue continued, and people became more aware of the subject, and we had scientists raising the number that they found in the budget. And then we took it for once very seriously. We went through all the budget items together with our independent planning agencies and looked, is this fossil subsidy or not? And we took an international definition and then came to the astonishing number of 40 to 47 billion in fossil fuel subsidies. And I was quite amazed. It was higher than any scientist had found, and it was the government that discovered it itself by following a meticulously well-researched approach. And I'm proud that we came clear of that and we followed that approach and published it. And now also ask others to follow the same approach globally and to see what their contribution is. And at the same time, it's not the case that by getting rid of these fossil fuel subsidies, we would earn 40 or 47 billion euros, or 47 billion euros immediately in the Dutch budget. That's not how it works, and you know that. So we also had a different approach, which was done by the PBL, that tried to find what can be done nationally and what has to be done at the international level, and where do we already have some form of carbon pricing, and where don't we have a form of carbon pricing. There's more of the economic rationale. But even if you follow that approach, we still found something, it's out of my mind, something like 18 billion. A lot of it was locked in international treaties. And by following that other approach, I think it also became clearer for us we needed to have this international coalition, and we need to look carefully how to design policies to phase it out. Sometimes for feedstock, as well as for fuels, it's slightly different, the kind of approach that we need to take. But for me, it's clear, and it's zero future means that there cannot be any fossil fuel subsidies, and we need to form international coalition that if we phase down fossil fuels, we also need to phase down, actually far more rapidly, fossil fuel subsidies, because only then we can reach that future. Thank you.
Thank you, Michel. And it is really good that there's finally transparency on the number. And we're going to talk about taking action in the next steps in a bit, but also on what's an ambitious and a realistic time frame. So Hilde, please take the floor for your opening statement.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm working for Oxfam Novib and Oxfam as an organization, and we're fighting inequality to reduce poverty and injustice worldwide. So for Oxfam, climate justice is key. So you cannot fight climate without taking into account that there's a justice element with it. So from a climate point of view, phasing out of fossil fuel subsidies makes, of course, a lot of sense. You know, money is just going in the wrong direction, and it should actually be going towards clean energy. So from that point of view, it is perfectly and crystal clear that it needs to be phased out. But also from an equity point of view, it is very clear that we need to stop or phase out fossil fuels because of the simple fact that many, many countries in the global south, the least developed countries, they are the ones that at this moment suffering. They are the ones that are hit hardest by climate change. They are the ones that are in debt traps. So there is just no way that these countries will be able to transition towards a clean society while they also have to adapt to climate change, while they're also having, you know, damages and losses from climate. It is just, it will not happen. So we need to find ways, and there's a lot of talk about that, how we can actually raise the trillions to ensure that worldwide all these countries are able to make the transition and adapt to climate change and have the means to protect themselves for loss and damage. And then there are several ways, but the fossil fuel subsidies is such a logic way. I'm coming to, you know, how the just element of that. We'll discuss that later, but this is, in general, it makes a lot of sense to ensure that, you know, money that is now being pumped into, you know, more fossil fuels is redirected towards clean and towards transitions.
Thank you, Hilde. And then finally, Carlos, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Well, the first thing I'd like to state is we have to take into account that one of the main drivers on the rise of fossil fuel subsidies in recent years, some of you have already pointed it out, is exogenous factors that create crises in our countries. Europe has found that out with the Ukraine war. Mexico has found that out with the extreme weather events that we have faced, tropical storms, heat waves that have made energy prices very volatile. But the thing is, those crises are not going away. We're going to have to learn to behave in a context of permanent crisis. And our institutions have, because this is a conversation about institutions, our institutions have proved to be very bad to behave in context of crisis. They have very little room for flexibility, very little room for adaptation, very little room for thinking on their feet. So we are going to have to see how to operate on this context of permanent crisis. Also, I'd like to comment that most of these fossil fuel subsidies are implicit subsidies. What that means is that they are not taking into account the full cost of producing those fuels, especially social and environmental costs. And it has been already pointed out that one of the most effective ways of making efforts to internalize those costs are through carbon pricing mechanisms, carbon taxes. The Latin American region is already taking steps towards implementing these kinds of instruments. Mexico has carbon taxes, Argentina, Chile, Colombia already have implemented these kind of taxes, but we are still at a very low level to make significant change. The Economic Commission for Latin America have created a meta-analysis that estimated the social cost for carbon in the region to around $25. And you have, within the taxes that exist in the region, a very broad variation. You have Uruguay with the highest tax in the world for carbon with $156, and you also have Argentina with 10, Chile with 5, Mexico that has the federal tax and local taxes that ranges from $2 to 25. So you have efforts that are still very disconnected, that we can still, so there's still a lot of room for collaboration. You can create a carbon corridor in the region to try to homogenize practices and prices. You have to create a labeled budget to guarantee that the revenue that you are getting from those taxes actually gets to climate change, because in many cases it's not labeled, so it just goes into the general budget and you have no idea how those resources are used. There are no clear rules on how to enforce it for adaptation or mitigation actions. So there are still rooms for collaboration and improvement within the region, but we are already taking action, and that action is very urgent. We have already faced in Mexico our first big environmental catastrophe with Guerrero, with the last storm that hit Guerrero and Acapulco mostly. The rebuilding efforts are estimated in $3 billion. And with the contributions that we have seen to the Loss and Damage Fund, that's not aid we can count on. So action within the region and within our countries is very urgent, and it's imperative if we want to solve the climate crisis. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Carlos, and I'm glad to see that all panelists agree on the sense of urgency here. I mean, it has taken quite a lot of time, and finally we're at this point, and I think we're at the right point in time also because the climate crisis is now and we only have a couple of years left. So let's look at the next steps, and Michel, maybe you can speak first on that, because we know there have been a lot of talks on this. There have been talks in G20, there's the Friends of Fossil Fuel Reform, and my first question would be, what is holding us back from taking action? Because we all realize it is needed, we all realize we can raise the funds that can unlock the key to moving money away from fossil fuel and into renewables. So what is holding us back from taking action, and can COP also play a role in this? Please, Michel.
Thank you. That's a very good question. And I think there's a multi-layered answer. This is, although it seems like an easy fix, in reality, it's complex to get it done. I think for one element is already what Tony mentioned, and Carlos was also mentioning, in a sense that governments want to support vulnerable consumers and want to support people in a crisis. And what happens is that there are often not that many of very advanced tax systems, and that people then use simple subsidies to help the poor, but the poor is then broadly defined, and in the end, many people are subsidized simply through direct subsidies. And that is very hard to get rid of. Some countries that have a lot of fossil fuels themselves actually, and this is also a way to give some support to their populations. So it's hard, and we have to face that dimension. But this is just a start, because most of the pollution is not in these countries. There's also the industrial part of it. People are afraid that some of the businesses will move unless this is done unilaterally, multilaterally. And when you do it unilaterally, people fear that your petrochemical industry moves to another country or production is cut. So that's why you have to act in unison to do so, and it's difficult to get agreement from many countries in this respect. But then that brings us also a bit closer to home, and that is within the European Union that I know best. And what I'm really proud of is that the European Commission, the last European Commission, announced this big package, and it was all done on the basis of QMV. It was some sort of implicit taxing, the ETS pricing, which is now in 4 out of the 5 sectors where we do pricing. And it was done on the basis of QMV, qualified majority voting. So no single country could basically block it. And that was fundamental to get progress within the European Union. When we discuss here at COP, it's all unanimity, ultimately. But there's one element in the European Union, which is called the Energy Taxation Directive. And the Energy Taxation Directive was part of the package that the European Commission presented. And there, although the package is now finalized, maybe 1 or 2 details are still lacking, the Energy Taxation Directive, there's marginal progress. It's marginal progress. And that is because there's still unanimity on tax issues within the European Union. So even within the European Union, where people agree on the 55% reduction goal, in the European Union that took so much leadership, even there, energy taxation is very difficult because it feels at the heart of the autonomy of governments. But we need it, and we need progress here. And then finally, at the domestic level, it starts with analysis. It starts with analysis and then awareness. So we want to tackle the problem the other way around. We start by a coalition of the willing, bring transparency to your fossil fuel subsidies, as we've done with the 40 to 47 billion. Do that collectively, show each other, and then have the public sentiment about these enormous amounts of fossil fuel subsidies, and make that work progressively to make agreements between a broader coalition of countries as possible to phase them out and to do a modern tax treatment of carbon within our economy. So that's the approach we'd like to follow and the difficulties we face along that road.
Okay, and it's actually very convenient because we have someone representing the European Union here right now, one of the key players also. So maybe, Tony, you can shed your light on what you feel is needed to take the action also, not only within the European Union, but also how the European Union can take leadership on a global scale.
Yeah, so I'm not going to repeat what Michel said, because that's all true. I will also not hide that because of the war and COVID, we accelerated this energy transition, and that's a good thing. And I'm here to tell you that I think that is irreversible. We'll run into some snags, but I think that's going well. But we are also seeing around the world some political forces who are suddenly using political arguments to push back on further transition, and this has to do with nature. I just wanted to mention to you that it is difficult, but we're going to push through, and that's the EU. What we also did is spearheaded together with the US, with Kenya, I think with Chile and some others, the global energy pledge at this COP. And basically that was tripling renewable energy before 2030, doubling energy efficiency, and with an idea of phasing out. Because if you do that, by default, you're phasing out of fossil fuels. And I'm proud to say that we got a critical mass of 123 countries who signed that. Now that's a pledge. It's good, but it's a pledge and it's voluntary. So the next step is to see how can we get these targets within a negotiated outcome in the text. And the next days and weeks, that's going to be the battle to get that. Let me finish off, because I was very inspired by the former speaker who was sitting here, this young lady who sat here. I don't know her name. But she said something very, very important. And I think it's something to also say to the forces that resist this. There are vested interests, and in the history of status quo doesn't want to change. There are very strong vested interests. So what she mentioned was basically the future generations, not just the young, but those who are not born, who have no voice, no vote in their future. And if we continue on this way, we're putting a mortgage on their future, and we don't have the right to do it. And there's a great book by Roman Knarjic. He wrote about the good ancestor. And we have to rekindle this. And I think the youth have hard and soft power. The hard power I spoke about, your marches, your demonstrations. The soft power is to ask the responsibility of those elder generations. Do you have children? What are you going to leave behind? Will you be a good ancestor? Will you plant the seeds of trees in whose shade you will not sit? Or will you follow a business model to eke out the last drop of oil for the last petrodollar for so-called shareholders? And I think that is the fundamental question. I am confident and I'm optimistic that the competitiveness of renewables will ultimately drive it out. But these fossil fuel subsidies are an impediment. But this basic question, and I think you have to ask it every day, never give up, because you have more power than you think. So I'd stop there. That would be my answer.
Okay, thank you. And then, now, as you said, thank you for explaining why it's sometimes difficult between all these countries negotiating together. But then, as Hilde touched upon, there's also a justice perspective to this. And there's a justice perspective from one side, quickly moving money away from fossil fuel into renewables. But then there's also the aspect to phase out fossil fuel subsidies in a fast way, but also ensuring that vulnerable countries, LDCs, the Global South, can be a part of it. So Hilde, maybe can I ask you to give your thoughts on this and also share with us what you think is an ambitious but also a realistic time schedule for this?
Yeah, I'll try. It's not easy. As I mentioned, we need trillions, so we need to get that money on the table. That's the starting point, I think. So as Oxfam, maybe some people have seen it, we have our Pollute the Pays campaign because we believe that that is ultimately what needs to happen. The polluter needs to start paying. So, and that we can do that on several levels. A wealth tax is an option. Windfall profit tax is an option. Make it more permanent than it is nowadays. But also the phase out of fossil fuel subsidies can be an aspect there. I think we need to make a division between fossil fuel production subsidies and fossil fuel consumption subsidies. And with regards to the production subsidies, I think that is a bit of a no-brainer. If you look at the profits of the fossil fuel industry in the last couple of years, it's trillions of profits. So I simply don't see why these companies also need to be subsidized. It's full point. There's one but here, and that is that we also need to avoid that the bill is being passed on to customers. And so you need to somehow develop a package where the fossil fuel production subsidies are being phased out, but somehow also block that, the bill is passed on to customers. So that's one aspect. But when it comes down to fossil fuel consumption subsidies, it becomes harder. I think many of these consumption subsidies aren't, and you mentioned that already, Michiel, they aren't really targeted well. So the bulk of it actually isn't really helping out, poor and vulnerable households. But many of them are just there and are for the higher income households, but still in many of the countries in the global south, those fossil fuel consumption subsidies are really, really important to ensure that poor households can afford, gas for cooking, can afford transport. So there it becomes harder. And there you need to bring in a justice element when you want to phase out. So what you need to do there is to really create a package where you really support the poor households by scaling up renewables and affordability of renewables, or use revenues from the fossil fuel subsidies to give support to these households. So you need to create those mechanisms. You need to create a package where you on one hand phase out, but also make sure that poorer households can still afford the basics that they entitled to have. So that these kinds of packages are not easy, but I think they are crucial if you really want to do it in a just manner.
Thank you, Hilde. And then, Carlos, maybe you can give your perspective on this. Please brief, because one of our panelists has to leave at 45 exactly. And maybe because we have these gentlemen here in power, maybe with the ability to change something about it, what would your call to action be to them?
Yeah, there is something very important happening in the Global South in general, and it's that the Global South countries are taking really strong actions into international tax reform because we are going to need it. For Latin America, the climate financing group for Latin America and the Caribbean estimated that our economies, Latin American economies, The income that we get from carbon-intensive activities is 196% higher than what we get from sustainable activities. So there is a need to reshape basically our entire economies, and that's going to take a lot of money, which we don't have because we have very low tax revenues. The average for Latin America is 21% of our GDPs, compared to the average of the OECD, which is around 31%, I think. So what we are looking for is to avoid the global tax evasion that tends to happen from the global north, that refuses to pay to the global south the taxes that we are owed. Some important steps have already happened. Colombia, Chile, and Brazil called for the first summit in Latin America and the Caribbean for an inclusive and fair global tax system, which is the first time in our history that this has happened. And the issue of a minimum tax level for the region has been brought up precisely to avoid tax havens and tax evasion. And a similar proposal was delivered by the African Negotiation Group at the UN that proposed also like a similar minimum tax at the international level, and a big like overhaul of the way that the international financial system works. Which is important, and it's important for you to listen to these voices and to try to push for these initiatives to actually see the light of day, because it is important to notice that, for example, in the case of the African initiative, 125 countries ratified this proposal at the UN, and 45 voted against, and I'll let you take a guess of which were the 45 that voted against: the US, the UK, France. So we are seeing a very big divide on these efforts between the global south and the global north. And this cannot happen if we are looking at realistic and immediate ways to act for global cooperation in a new international tax system. So I think that, I think that your voices would be invaluable for some of these countries that have refused to acknowledge their responsibility in the condition of the global south to reconsider.
Thank you, Carlos. And then to round up this discussion, I think it's very good to hear that we agree that this has to be transparent. That's the first step. And afterwards, we have to come up with concrete steps on how to phase out these fossil fuel subsidies. And it must be done in a way that is just for the consumer, because in the end, it's about making the polluter pay. So also to everyone here, thank you for being here. Also thank you to all the panelists. And take this back to your country and make sure that we get together, that we make our voices heard, and that we mobilize the people to make sure that we raise the funds that we can effectively tackle the climate crisis. Thank you all, and it's up to the next panel.
Okay, hello everybody. Thank you so much to the first panel and the second panel for the interesting conversations. I'm Tessa Dole, I'm from the We Are Tomorrow Global Partnership, and we'll be facilitating the third panel we have today on realizing climate justice through institutions, and specifically focusing on climate education as a human right, as an institutionalization of climate empowerment. We are also not completely complete yet, but I'm sure the fourth panelist will come in at any point. Let's first just start off by introducing the three panelists that we already have here today. So first, Joanita, can I please welcome you to the stage and ask for a warm applause for Joanita? Joanita is from Girls for Climate Action Uganda, one of the partners from We Are Tomorrow Global Partnership, and she is working on enabling girls and women to take the lead in the transition to a sustainable future, so thank you so much for being here. Then can I get a warm applause for Esther? Esther is And then I have to, yes, Esther is from Youth Initiative for Climate Action, Sierra Leone. Esther, thank you so much for being here. Very last minute as well, because we had one of our speakers actually fall out. Shema, the ACE negotiator, couldn't make it, unfortunately, because she is in ACE negotiations. So can I welcome Timothy to the stage, our wonderful, take any seat you want. Timothy has been so nice to also leave the ACE negotiations a little bit earlier to be our ACE expert. He is the founder of Global Youth Development Institute and was the ACE negotiator on behalf of Fiji on the action plan adopted at COP27. So also a warm welcome. And then last but certainly not least, can I welcome Natalie to the stage. Natalie is the founder of All for Climate Action, working on climate empowerment in Zimbabwe. So when we decided that we wanted to have a panel on climate education, that we found that to be one of the ways we could institutionalize climate justice, and a very important one, because climate education actually builds resilience in the face of climate change. Currently, many people do not know that global warming is the cause of the changes that they face in their communities, making it difficult or even impossible for people to adapt to their changing environment. And equipping people with the knowledge that climate change is the culprit makes it possible for them to firstly adapt to the environment in a more effective way, but also secondly contribute to climate mitigation, as they can now recognize the importance of mitigation. And looking at the issue from a human rights perspective, we all know that education is a fundamental human right, as it is indispensable for the exercise of other human rights. In terms of climate and the environment, in July 2022, the UNGA recognized a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment as a human right. So we argue that environmental education is actually indispensable to ensure the right to a sustainable environment, as it equips people to contribute to that environment. That is some background information on climate education as a human right, and we now want to move on to the practical side of it by asking Joanita, as our first speaker, to inform us on why it is so important to spend time, energy, and resources on climate education.
Thank you so much. I'm very, very glad to be here to be talking about climate education as a key component when you talk about all the other aspects of building resilience, adaptation, mitigation. So the reason as to why we do climate education as Girls for Climate Action is because we know the power of knowledge in adapting to different climate crises. So when you look at, for example, Uganda, most of the children do not have access to formal education, and the situation is improving, I would say, but when you talk about climate education for us, it's even getting out of the schools. So we have a program that runs in school that's called the Green Master Program, and this is a very practical curriculum for children between the age of 6 and 14 years. And then also we do climate education out of school, where we use informal methods of learning so that communities can understand the impacts of climate change on their lives. We not only end there, but also we engage young women and girls as well in making sure that we use the knowledge they have, the informal knowledge that they have, to create solutions to climate change, and also using their local-led adaptation strategies to make sure that most of this knowledge is transferred from one place to the other. So in communities, we have what we call the climate demonstration hubs. These are spaces where women, youth, and children come to share information, to share knowledge, but also learn from each other, because we understand that everybody every time I talk about climate change, I say the biggest expert is the person that is going through the impacts of climate change. But most of the times when we have research that is happening on the ground, people come as researchers. I'm a doctor, I'm from a certain area, for example, in Europe, I would say, to talk about a crisis that is happening in Africa. But at the same time, you are despising the information, the knowledge that would actually get from these people. You're only using them as respondents, but actually they would drive the entire research that could even create community-led solutions when we get the data as well. So for us, these hubs that we have in communities enable knowledge sharing from the informal side of it, but also we work with institutions that come into communities, also share knowledge, so that communities can have, it's like a think tank that has formal and informal information. So when it comes to also in schools, we use very playful ways of transferring knowledge. And for us, it's everything that you learned as a child, I think most of it we know. So when you get a child to learn something when they're still young, there is a behavior that comes with it. So most of the children that have gone through our programs have been able to even educate their parents. Oh, mommy, don't take the plastic bag because it's not good for the environment. So this information that they're getting from school through our program is even helping at the family level, as a family unit as well, to actually get this information. So we know that there's power in schools and engaging as many children as possible on the formal level, but also we understand the situation that most children also don't have access to education, the formal education. That is why we also get into communities so that they can also get the information as well, because it's a human right, just like I've said. Everyone has a right to access education. Every child has a right to access education, but also don't have to be in the idealist world of it's a right. But of course, in reality, at the moment, it's not happening in the formal way for these children to access school. So these are some of the things that we are doing to enable education, to enable easy understanding of the climate science complex, and making sure that it's brought to the lay child's language, in a way, if I would put up that way. So I believe in the power of education, because if we all didn't know about climate change, we wouldn't be in this room trying to advocate for climate justice. It's after that that you actually get to know this is how we can hold our leaders accountable. This is how we can vote with our money and say we are not going to buy a plastic bag, we are not going to support this particular company because it's polluting. It's after understanding that we can take action. That is why, for me, education is very important.
Thank you so much. Yes. Yeah, and I think it's also wonderful that you shed light on how through education youth can also become the agents of change, really, that we need to also educate other people, and they can become empowermenters themselves. Thank you. Natalie, now that you have the mic, can you also share how you are working for climate empowerment in Zimbabwe with us, please?
Hello, everyone. So I think being the founder of the organization, realizing that there's still a huge gap between climate science and the people. You look at countries like Uganda, Nigeria, how actively young people have been protesting, have been, coming up with climate movements, and comparing it within my country. And the reason why young people haven't been participating as much comparing to other countries is because probably they don't really have a platform. They don't really have a starting point, and that came to the realization that we need to start something. That's why we came up with All for Climate Action. And also, as we went along, as we started implementing the idea on ground, we then realized that, yes, we have the ACE, we have the Action for Climate Empowerment. It's not just giving education, but there's still more of raising awareness. There's more of trainings, which I also promote very, I think it's quite important to have trainings. You look at access to information itself, public participation, you talk of international cooperation. And we have been trying to do as many activities as possible. The formal ones, the informals, and we're now at that point where we also have to monitor our activities. What works best for the people? What do people love? Is it the formal or the informal? Because when you're doing these programs as young people, we also need to see if is it really working or not. We need to monitor, and we have also tried to at least create events that are more accessible to everyone, try to be more inclusive. So our programs also have to look at the age range. what can be suitable for preschool kids, what can be suitable for young people, what can be suitable for elderly, and what trainings can we actually give for people who are in the university. I think recently we had, I think the last event that we had was on, no, not the last one, but one of the most interesting ones was on the climate career fair. It was quite opening. What can you do with your career? It's something that when you look at the educational system, yes, they are being taught about climate change, but really it's not really enough for them to really relate to their careers, to their jobs. But then that climate career fair gave them some sort of like an insight of what they can do better within their careers. You don't really need to be a climate activist, actually, but even though if you're a nurse, even though if you're an electrician, there's something that you can still contribute. And I think it's one of those innovative events that we have held, and we look forward to that in 2024. Let's try to cooperate universities, because this was actually quite an informal event, and it was quite opening. So I think having something like that, something that is relatable, can actually try to promote youth participation within even the educational system in relation to climate change issues. So yeah, we've been doing quite, most of our work have been related mostly with the action for climate empowerment elements, yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think it's interesting that what you're saying is also that education is not the same thing as empowerment. That if you educate people and you don't do it in the right way, you're not empowering them to actually take action. And I think it's wonderful to see that young people who themselves understand what it's like to be a young person engaged with climate action are the ones actually taking the lead in making sure that others also feel empowered. Thank you for sharing. And then last but not least, Esther, can I also ask you to share how you're working towards climate empowerment?
Okay. In Sierra Leone, what I do is that I lead a team of youth, especially women and girls, young women and girls in Sierra Leone, to take climate smart initiative. So when we started in 2019, we started with tree planting. We thought we could start with that because we had the big ideas, we have the big dreams, we have every crazy ideas you can think about climate. And when we walk into these communities and want to implement, we started with 100 trees. They planted 100 trees. And then we see that the communities are not actually embracing the project, the tree planting project. So we came back and to the drawing decks and say, okay, what are we going to do? We did our research and then find out that our communities, people living in the communities, the most vulnerable to the climate crisis, are not educated. So we wrote a proposal. Unfortunately, we were not able to get any fund. So our climate education project in 50 schools in Sierra Leone, which we have completed about 45. So we've paused because of COP28. By the time we get back, we'll be able to complete the rest of the 5 schools. We self-funded most of this project in Sierra Leone. And during the process of the climate education campaign, we saw the gap between those who are actually having access to the information online and those who are in rural villages, the marginalized communities that do not have access to these things that are being posted online about climate education. So after educating those at the school, we also thought of taking it to the community levels. We take it to coastal communities. We started engaging community leaders. We cannot reach actually all of the communities in some certain place. So what we did was We gather the community leaders, which include the chiefs, the kings, and the youth leaders, the women leaders. We gather them, we teach them about climate education. We start at the basic of what climate education is and how they are contributing and what they can do and how they can also hold government and other stakeholders accountable. During that process, like I said, we encountered the lack of support from our leaders. In as much we wrote the concept notes, shared it with a lot of people. We actually even opened a GoFundMe account. And unfortunately, we only had about 4 people who only donated. Yeah, it's been like 6 months since we launched the account. And then we saw that our leaders, from where I come from in Sierra Leone, were not supportive. We've been engaging the Ministry of Climate Change and Environment on this. They kept giving us promises that they cannot fulfill. But as youth, as she was saying, I cannot sit by and say, I'm going to wait for the big money. I'm going to wait for the big fund. I'm going to wait until they act. So we took from our stipends, family support, and implemented the project. And currently, I can proudly say we have established over 15 school green clubs in Sierra Leone, and we're looking forward to establishing more, even in communities as they are doing, even in communities that are vulnerable to this crisis.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful to hear that you're able to do that even without funds, as you said, which I think is so impressive and something that is so far from some of our experiences. And I think this is maybe a good moment to ask Timothy to to tell us about what he did last year as negotiator on behalf of Fiji, what the ACE action plan is that was established in COP27 and what we're currently working on, as we see that ACE is definitely making steps, but we still also see a lot of barriers to the actual empowerment on the ground. So Timothy, thank you for being here and missing some of negotiations.
Yes, thank you for having me and having the mercy to put me last. I've been able to catch my breath at least a little from running from B1 in the negotiations, and I've been keeping an eye here to see if there are any updates from colleagues there, because unfortunately we are still stuck on finance within ACE as we speak. This is something that we worked on. It was a very high priority for Fiji. It was the G77 in China position for COP27 to get that into our ACE action plan, and I can also back up and explain a little bit into what that is, but we're still struggling, and that's even though the young people have been demanding for years in these negotiations, making submissions, talking to negotiators, emphasizing the importance of finance, bringing concrete proposals, how to create platforms that could make it easier for young people to get the funds that they need to do ACE, and that fight is still playing out in this level. But what's fundamental about ACE is, of course, it's not only about education, but it's also public participation, it's awareness raising, it's access to information, it's training. Really, it's at the core of anything that you're going to do, whether that's mitigation, we want to do behavior change, reduce emissions, an awareness campaign might be part of that. A country's NDC says that we're going to switch to X% of renewable energy by whatever year. All right, do you have enough renewable energy professionals? Maybe that's going to tick the boxes of education and training. And then, of course, are you actually having members of civil society participate? Does a local community have access to information of how climate change is going to impact them so that they know how to build their resilience? And do they have the participation in government decisions and what's going to affect that for them? So the end goal is not education itself, but as said, empowerment. And that it definitely also needs to include the non-formal side, because for myself, and I hear from so many other colleagues, it's the younger generations that are educating their parents, the older generations, so that's not even in the formal education system anymore, but is the way to reach those other generations. So to say where we are now in terms of the action plan, this was a new development for ACE. So ACE, right, it goes all the way back to Article 6 of the convention, then we reinforced that as Article 12 of the Paris Agreement, and it's had a number of work programs over the years, which had all these very nice recommendations where the governments, they came together and said, oh, you know, we should do this for ACE, we should do that. And of course, it's all voluntary, it's all country-driven, it's all flexible, but you have all these nice recommendations. And something that young people really did push for, because in 2020, we came to the end of the previous work program, which was the Doha work program. And so parties needed to adopt a new one, right? What are we doing? And so we really had a strong position, and this was across civil society as well, that parties needed to get more specific about what they were going to do and the time frame in which they were going to do that than just all these nice lists. So we created a table, not a list, which is the ACE action plan. So you can find this as an annex to the decision from COP27. It has 4 nice categories, which are the 4 priority areas of the work program. And there's a number of specific activities under these that say, oh, we should organize regional workshops, trainings, capacity buildings. And then it says, okay, parties will do that. And all right, the secretariat will support. And you'll see in various places, you know, youth or non-party stakeholders get mentioned in there. So it was still a step in the right direction, but it was, as noted, missing out on the finance. So we again have all these nice activities, but couldn't land anything definitive to solve that finance gap. So that remains where we're at. What we're really trying to do at this COP is use these ACE negotiations to try to get some language that moves us toward the finance, but of course, the young people can't sit around waiting for the finance, so we're continuing to do our best, but we shouldn't have to be doing that. You shouldn't have to be taking it out of your stipends. There's no excuse for that. We know how fundamental ACE is, we know the fundamental role of youth, so it's a matter of parties to be willing to make the finance available for that, or that we find other creative solutions of how to connect donors, corporate social responsibility to projects by young people. Which makes it even more surprising we're having this difficulty to get finance accepted by parties, because we've even said, you don't need to pay for it, just make a platform that will make it more attractive for donors to support young people. This is not difficult, this is not even your public finance. And yet we continue to discuss. So yeah, very big, important topic. Happy to get into more of the questions or discussion to explore any of those elements. Also, our work is supporting young people to try to implement ACE back at home, not only be meaningfully represented in this space. So there's, of course, that aspect as well.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think something that we now have touched on, I think in all of your statements, is the difference between informal and formal education, right? And I think that might be something that's worth diving into a little bit deeper, because even if we get financing on arranged at this COP, how are we going to be able to ensure that it actually reaches informal projects as well, which is just so much harder to institutionalize? So I want to ask the panel if any of you have experience with informal projects that were very successful, maybe that have created green entrepreneurship afterwards, and that were actually maybe even more successful than formal projects.
Thank you so much. So at Girls for Climate Action, we are doing a lot of that as well. So we run a 9 weeks greenpreneurship program for young women and girls in rural communities that have not gotten access to formal education. And for us, it's not basically taking from them, because most of the data, when we go into communities, we are taking from these communities and we are not really giving. But for us, this is a space for them to hold the power to what they want to do. And the only thing we really support with is the skills to actually get to where they want to go to. And so whenever we reach these communities, they're actually doing something. And these are done at the household level. And so part of the greenpreneurship program that we run for the 9 weeks, 2 hours every week, not even every day, and I'll get to why it's 2 hours every week, is because, so when we get into these communities, we do a 9 weeks program, and after that, after the 9 weeks, we have a pitch event where they actually speak and pitch their ideas in their local languages. And most of the solutions come from them. So the entire program is basically them sharing what they're doing, but most times they're doing it as one woman doing it in their small kitchen, and this knowledge that remains in the kitchen, we want it out to solve the energy problems, because this is where solutions are. And so when they get into this program, they team up and create very cool solutions. Because we understand that even these communities have resources, but if people that own these resources, for example, they are local leaders, they are member of parliament, if they don't know what they want in regards to developing their particular projects, then most of the money will just be appearances at funerals, appearances at parties, and they will not benefit from that. So after this 9 weeks program, we also give mentorship for six months, so that we see this particular green business running from just an idea from the kitchen to an idea that can benefit the entire community. So this is what we are doing when it comes to informal education. And this year we have gotten 25 businesses out of a group of 60 women that we've taken through the program. For us, the thing is, we want to have because now there are 25 teams having 25 ideas, 25 businesses, and they're going through our mentorship program. But also now they hold the thing of, we know about climate change. I know my business is solving a climate challenge, and I want to be able to contribute to that. So they are saving the planet, but also when you talk about alternative financing, climate financing, these are some of the solutions that can even bring money to these communities, because there are so many underlying issues. Before climate change, communities see other issues, for example, access to education. They say poverty, I don't have food, I don't have water. So these are the challenges that they know better. But also we know that we need to economically be in position to build our resilience, because if right now the 25 businesses, they have customers now, they're making sales, now we know that they can employ other people, other women within the communities, and they can also benefit from this particular program. So that means that we are building the resilience from an economic angle, because I have alternatives of what I can do if a flood happened in my house. I can easily maybe sleep in a hotel for one night, but there are people that can't sleep in a hotel for one night. But maybe when we economically empower them, they can also, escape the flood. So that is why for us, adaptation is very, very important, and building the resilience of communities mean that they should understand the problem and see how they can also have their solutions treasured in the process and also build their resilience. So this is what we are doing, and we are aiming to also go to different countries like Kenya. We've started conversations with different indigenous groups of people to see how Maasai people can as well benefit from this program, because they're telling them, oh, change your ways of living. But I've been a pastoralist since I was a child. So how do you tell me to change my way of living? So we want to know which solutions do they have and what can we make sense out of, and how can they benefit from our programs as well. But of course, funding has also been a very big problem, because we want to do more, We want this solution to be a national solution, but now it's still at the community level, because these women can't access funding. If you're not going to write for them proposals, they'll not get this money. But we are only a team of a few young people that are also living on saliva. So at the end of the day, you don't want to use all your money to actually facilitate, but you can also facilitate with the information that you have so that they can benefit from that program. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And maybe you or one of the other panelists can also explain to us what exactly are the barriers when you're trying to get that finance. What are is it not in place at all, or is it impossible to get your proposal accepted? What are the main barriers you face when you're trying to fund your projects?
For me in Sierra Leone, one of my challenges I have encountered while writing projects and proposals about climate education and, of course, the empowerment of women and girls in the climate crisis, is that for international funds, is somehow the criteria. Because sometimes when you check the criteria, they're asking you, for instance, of 4, 5, 6 years experience in it, I don't have that much. And sometimes they're asking for a source of documentation that I cannot actually provide. One, for documentation, it can be the websites they're asking for. And Sierra Leone, it takes like $250 to actually set up a website for your organization. And at this time, instead of me setting up a website for my organization, I would rather use the 250 to expand my climate education project in like something like more 40 schools or like 30 more communities in my country. And for national level is somehow a process of who you know and who know you and who you know in order to get the funds. When we write projects to UNICEF in Sierra Leone, we write to UNFPA, we write to different other NGOs that are in the country. They've sent you back to the government. We've given the government the money to implement projects. Then we go back to the government. We meet parliamentarians, we meet ministers, we meet the governments themselves, and they tell us we've used the money for something else. So it's like a thing of back and forth, back and forth. These are the problems we've been facing. And even sometimes even from family support again, it can be somehow, they don't want, like she said, you don't want to spend all your money and then you're left with nothing. So then the challenge is, I think, for one thing that we can solve, since he's in the room, is that while also we are setting funds for this, the climate education, we're later laying emphasis on climate finance, we should also try to see how we channel these things to the right people. For youth, for example, for people like us who are leading organizations, like she said, we'd love to do more. We'd like to expand our projects, but we don't have the money. And we cannot keep taking from our stipends. You've said it. I cannot keep taking from my stipends. We need, for example, you can tailor it through organizations that you know they are working with us and not directly to the government. Because once it gets to the hands of the government and our leaders in our country, it is hard to really get it from them, because again, like I said, it's about who you know in the country. It's an African setting. It's about who you know and who you know who can connect you to them. And when we think about again about the international funds, one thing we should do is that we set funds for newly established organization. Not all of us have the 5 years, 6 years experience. We're a COP, we're gathering information, we're connecting with people who have also implemented initiatives in their own country. Like after this panel discussion, I'll definitely have to connect with her. I want to do the same things she's been doing. I want to learn what are the things you've done, what are the mistakes, so I don't have to repeat it all over again. So somehow reduce the criteria level a little bit to favor those who are just starting. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe, yes.
Okay. So I did like to add on that. In my country, we have what we call the PVO bill. So currently, like, registration of organizations is stopped. So I did believe that the financial resources might be out there, but for me as a young organization, for us as a young organization, there is quite a lot of policies that needs to be, presented by my organization. There's need, like, for the registration form, the registration certificate. So we have been operating for the past three years. And it was this year that when we realized that we need to register, because I need to stop pumping my money out now, because I also need to buy ice cream. I need to go out, So I also need to have funding for the programs that we do. You cannot continuously, personally fund for the project. So one of the biggest right now, and I think it has been on my mind since yesterday, someone actually advised me, why don't you consider registering your organization outside the country, where you have a sister organization that they would at least manage your funding, and then you can still have your programs going on at home. But that also needs technical experts. And trust me, working with volunteers is not easy. and especially when you're starting an organization. Yeah, she's also agreeing. It's not easy. One of the most stressing thing, and worse when you're working with a young person based in Zimbabwe who is not employed, and at the same time, they need data to keep connected. You also need data. You are not fully employed. You also get part-time jobs. So it's not something that is easy to really say, I want to employ you, I want to work together with you, because you also need to give them something. And as much as they're working voluntarily, you need to give them something. If it is data allowance, you need to give them something. So it's something that is actually straining human resource, especially when you don't have enough resources. So that's one of the most barriers that I've been facing, that you come up with a team and someone tells you, like, you know what, I'm done. I don't want this anymore, because they're not really getting much benefits from it. So in as much as, yes, they're gaining exposure, connections, but they need to eat. They need to put food on the table. I can come here and, you know, African parents are very, they always ask this, also, you're attending this meeting, what are you bringing on the table? You can do everything, you can attend as million as I don't know, meetings, but Africans, we just want to see something on the table. But then it comes to you as a visionary, that you don't really give up on your vision, right? You still push. So I think for me, from my side, it has been the registration issue. Yes, you can do all the paperwork, but in terms of just getting the registration number, right now it's one of the most stressing thing I'm facing currently, and human resource issue, and maybe access to the funding as well, because I recently approached one of the guys who works at this embassy in Zimbabwe. He said that they're now doing closed applications. And he literally listed the things that he needs for you to get a certain funding. It might be not so big, but the list of things that also you need to look for legal experts. Yes, you can have friends, but those friends, of course, you don't just like DM them and say, hey, what's up? Can you give me advice on this? You also need to buy them lunch, hey. So those are the things that you have to look at. You need to look at the human resource policies, the gender policy, environmental policies. The list was just too long. And you just look at yourself and you say, yes, we're 3 years old, but wow, we still have a long way to go. So yeah, there's quite a lot of barriers there, and I hope in the future we'll be able to tackle them soon. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing. I think you made it very clear that there are very practical barriers, but there's also really they're all institutionalized barriers, right? It's about not being able to get registered, it's about not being trusted by the government with the funding, either because you're youth-led or because you have only existed for a couple of years or not even. So I think we need to look at institutional solutions to that. Timothy, can you maybe explain to us how ACE is trying to work on this? Not you specifically, we won't put that pressure on you. But are these issues being tackled, and what are kind of the mechanisms that the UNFCCC is trying to work with right now?
Well, I won't speak so much to what the UNFCCC, as in like the Secretariat, is trying to do, but I can say that all of these issues are ones that we've been very much aware of, and are in fact why, as is that microphone?
Yeah, it's been happening a while. So yeah.
Are issues that, as the ACE working group of Youngo, we were very much aware of, and we actually designed. I alluded to this, but we gave it a name: the ACE Marketplace. And this would be a platform that you could envision as sort of an incubator kind of a space. You know, it could simply be a place for, you have a project proposal, you can put it on there. It doesn't have all of the vetting requirements and issues that you would run into, you know, trying to go directly to philanthropy, but you have your project there and it's able to then be viewed. But of course that doesn't go far enough, because all these barriers, there's solutions. You just have to have some sort of an intermediary entity, we'll call it an incubator, and this will help facilitate the young people to meet the requirements. Because of course we don't want to just say, oh, young people won't live up to reporting standards or be accountable with the finance. If you're going to ask for money, you do need to be credible. But of course, that isn't an excuse to not make the finance available. So if there's a real commitment to intergenerational equity in climate change, then they will make it possible for the young people. They will help them to be able to meet the standards and requirements so that they can access the finance. And even if you look at all the money coming from UNFCCC, not very accessible outside of governments, right? The GCF, well, you need this special accreditation and you technically can get it outside of a government, but you need the government in the loop, and it's complicated. The Jeff Small Grants Program, of course, that's a little bit more accessible, but still many requirements. And none of this is financed at the scale that we actually need. So the only way to mobilize it in time is to have some of these additional mechanisms. And this is something we designed it, we were pushing for it, and again, so far parties had not adopted it. I'm also hearing that unfortunately my colleagues in the ACE negotiations are still totally deadlocked. There are certain countries, we know who they are, who are still drawing red lines of you can't even mention finance at all, even to talk about it in the ACE dialogues, which will happen next year and continue on. But I mean, I guess that makes it's up to us. And so I would ask, how can we better collaborate as young people, as organizations? Something I try to do with my organization, Global Youth Development Institute, is help to make it available as a platform. So if you're struggling to be able to register an entity in your country, or you have an entity but it's struggling to get the finance, maybe it's helpful just to have your token international partner that you can say, oh, but look, we have this international organization, and oh, this organization, they're admitted with the UNFCCC process, they do this, they speak all this jargon and all these things. If that's what it takes as we're building our way toward the actual genuine solution, which is that you shouldn't need any of that, but there's a place you can go and be able to get what you need, then so be it. But we can't wait. We know the urgency. And so it's collaboration between all of us as young people, and then really bringing proposals to government that will be so widely supported, have so many partners, have so much motivation behind them that they'll reach a point where they can't keep saying no. And I don't know, I've kind of gone back and forth here between, yes, there's a way we can do it, let's be hopeful, and then also being frustrated at the negotiations. So maybe in general, a lot of us feel more or less optimistic certain days when it comes to climate action, but do I say climate anxiety? Am I allowed to say that? But yeah, that too. So, but we're in this together. And the one thing that's kept me back in this space for 12 years now of UNFCCC has been meeting so many amazing young people from many other countries and figuring out how we tackle all this together from our different places in the world that we're from, and that's going to lead us toward what we need to do. But maybe as a concrete action I will propose is that let's better document a lot of these barriers and then figure out, again, we know what some of the solutions are, but build more of a base of evidence and support for some of these solutions, and come back with stronger proposals, or find the right countries that want to be the champion, or find the right corporations that want to be the champion, but give them something concrete so that we're not only talking about the problems, but really bringing the solutions and saying, if you care about the future generations, if you care about climate action, you can do this, and you're out of excuses to not do this.
Thank you. We have 1 minute left, so I'm just going to give the floor to Joanita. Already thank all of our amazing panelists. But we really can't run long, so I just want to give you the word for any final thoughts, if you want to, and then we will have to leave because the technicians need to leave as well.
I didn't know I was going to give any final thoughts, but I will. So maybe final thoughts. I'll talk about the We Are Tomorrow Global Partnership, a very good partnership with different youth in the Netherlands, but as well in the Global South, where we are really aiming at changing policy and making sure that we nationalize the different policies for our countries and see how we can advance that. And the process is good because then it empowers young people to be able to step up, because we all know that whichever solutions that we are creating at every level, if policies are still not favoring us, if we are not part of strengthening these policies, formulating them and implementing them, there's not so much that we can do. So I appreciate the We Are Tomorrow Global Partnership and the different partners that are in the room, but as well as different young people that are doing amazing work. But I would still want to say that as young people, we need to work together as a collective to be able to push our voices further, because there's power in voices, there's strength in voices. If one person speaks, they'll only listen to one person, or they won't listen at all. But if all the youth came together to really advocate for climate education, empowerment, supporting climate education itself, I think would be going further, but also including climate education in all our different policies at the national level would take all the decision-making processes even simpler at the global level. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. It's wonderful that you're still here. And thank you on behalf of all the organizing parties, and I wish you a wonderful evening.